I'm pretty excited and pumped to be talking to you guys today about Kick-Ass Catch-Up. So let me just share the screen with you, and I'm a big believer on starting on time. So as if many of you have worked with me, you will know that to be true. So just getting this up as we speak. Here we go. So we've got it on the screen. I've got Nikki with me as well. So my challenge will be to keep Nikki entertained. So yeah, she's already laughing. I'm winning. So you know how most of our catch-ups tend to be sort of transactional, task-focused and when we have time? Well, I've been researching this Kick-Ass program that makes every conversation with your people really meaningful. And it's so that essentially your people don't check out of their check-ins. And this is when both of you look forward to your catch-ups and even get disappointed when they're not cancelled. So let me introduce you to this concept that helps you, yes, become the legendary leader that people can't stop talking about. And I mean they can't stop talking about for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. So I'm going to make what I think is a pretty safe assumption that all of you would have had an experience of catching up with your manager or a project lead at some time during your career. And maybe the caliber of them will likely vary from ad hoc and pretty light on to those that add so much value that you actually don't want to miss out. And what I've learned from researching and authoring 2 books on how we communicate and how we connect, and with over 25 years of consulting experience, is that facilitating great one-on-ones helps you double your people's impact, and it grows them in their career with clarity. And that's what we want. And what happens in that experience is that people will learn that you, as a leader or their manager, were a significant part of that journey, and where people won't be checking out of their check-ins. So as a mentor, trainer and facilitator of teams and businesses, I've observed a lot of my time. So let me see if you can connect with any of these. So chances are that you care about your people. So this is actually why you're on the webinar in the first place. And you care about the performance of your team. So that's a no-brainer. I'm sure that many of you, if you've been reading my blogs or my rants over the last few years, you know that my stance on performance reviews is that they're not improving the performance of our people, not always, well, not mostly. And in fact, some of them are doing the opposite. So they're dull, they're awkward, and they can become a box-ticking exercise. So maybe some of you have been good at having what I call task-focused catch-ups, but you're not quite sure how to add more value in the time that you have. So your default becomes that you just look at what's on the list. Or maybe some of you are new or even experienced leaders where you know that what's required of your job, the technical components of your role, but it's the people stuff that's not as clear. I was actually just reading an article last week from Jeff Weiner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn. And he's got access to more detailed employment information that I would suggest any other government. So he knows what people post, what jobs people have, and what jobs people want. And what he says, the biggest skills gap that he sees moving into the future is not technical skills or coding skills, it's the soft skills. So if that's how you feel, you're not alone. So that's where Kick-Ass Catch-Ups come in. And a lot of people say, yeah, Georgia, but we don't have the time to structure our catch-ups. We've got actual work to do. So yeah, here's the news. I don't care whether you've got 3 minutes or 30 minutes. Your job is to definitely make them count, and you can't afford not to. So what's a Kick-Ass Catch-Up? So glad you asked. So it's pretty simple. It's got 2 parts. And like what I reckon any great innovation is that it can be reduced to a formula. And here it is. Q1 plus Q2 equals CACU, or Kick-Ass Catch-Ups, squared. So what stops us from having more meaningful catch-ups, the high caliber ones? Well, for one, you don't have to be old school. And many of the leaders that I sometimes work with or don't work with, is that they have this mentality is that task is king. I reckon many people might know some like that, or care to admit that I can certainly fall into the trap of that. But most of our catch-ups with our people tend to be about box ticking or looking at short-term goals and putting out bushfires. So what I'm going to do is break down some old school and new school thinking and talk about the quality of our catch-ups and how actually important they are. So what we need to do is look at focusing on quality, which is a no-brainer. But yeah, let me flick to the old school and new school. So old school thinking is focusing on tasks. New school thinking is where we focus on not just the task, we also look at people's career. We look at the KPIs that they've set for themselves on an annual or biannual basis. We look at their professional development and we focus on feedback. Old school is where we're reactive, where we're actually focused on putting out fires, whereas new school is where we're proactive and we're focused on fire prevention. Old school is if I have time. New school is you are my time. So old school is where the conversations are driven by the manager, by you guys, whereas new school is where the conversations are driven by both. And the same goes for feedback. Old school is where we as managers are just giving feedback to our people, whereas new school is that we create this rhythm of feedback for it being both ways. So you guys hearing where I'm coming from? So the great Ken Blanchard also tells us that most people crave more time with their managers, which is kind of remarkable, but that's you. That's what they want. So I'm going to ask you, and I'll open the chat again. Anyone care to take a stab at how much more time your team would like with you? So think about it from a percentage perspective. How much time, percentage-wise, do you think your team want hanging out with you? So give me some thoughts. So I got 10%. I've also got 25. Yeah, cool. At least 30 more minutes a week. Yep, that makes sense. Yep, okay, cool. Some even 40. Yeah, right, okay. Have we got any that thinks maybe 50% or 60%? They're looking for more time? Yeah, some of us is great, Pete. Yep, 100, double. Yep, hearing you. So the answer, you ready? Is 89%. So according to Right Managements, who just did a recent white paper on this whole issue, 89% of people want to spend more time with you. So 90% of the people that you're working with want to hang out with you much more than they already do. So we're talking about people that you work with, not people off the street or maybe even people that you're married to. They probably want less, maybe much less. Well, how can I talk? I'm divorced, so look at where it got me. But most of us want to meet with our managers more often. And I reckon that's pretty wow. But the problem is that when we do it in the old school way, we're making our people old school thinkers, and we need a better way. I reckon what we need is, when it comes to kick-ass catch-ups, a bit of the Goldilocks approach. We don't want to make it too hard, too structured, too prepared and get everything just right or just perfect. Are you hearing me, the perfectionists? But we also don't want to rock up and wing it and see how the cookie crumbles, because everything is in life is kind of about balance, right? So what we're looking for is the sweet spot in the middle, just enough to bring value. So a lot of clients say to me, yeah, but you don't understand. We're really busy and we just don't have time to catch up. Well, you know what? Here's the good news. If you only have 3 minutes to catch up with your team member, one of the best questions you can ever ask them is this. What's on your mind? When I worked at Nous, which was or still is, an awesome management consulting firm and one of the great places to work, I reported to the MD, to Tim Orton, who was an incredible man and leader. And Tim was super time poor, like any great leaders, but my time with him was rich. So he'd say to me at the start of our catch-ups, okay, Georgia, we've got 10 minutes. what's on your mind? It was such an awesome question. And what he'd do with me after that is we deal with the key issue for me. And what I really loved about when he'd ask me these questions is he wouldn't also tell me the answer. He'd ask me questions to help me work through the issue myself, so that I was actually part of coming up with the solution. So the what's on your mind is a really cool open question that makes people think. It also shows them that you're interested in what their thoughts are, and it cuts to the core of what they need to talk about. So that's about the quality component. Let's look at the other Q, which is quantity. And the $1 million question when it comes to kick-ass questions, or kick-ass catch-ups, I should say, is how much is the right amount? I'm going to talk about it in reference to Deloitte. So in 2016, they made a massive change, and I happened to interview their global head of people, Alex Bashinsky, when I was interviewing him for my second book. And this is what he told me. He said that they knew through surveys and looking at their data that the performance appraisal process wasn't getting the return based on the time and money that they'd spent. So people weren't improving through their performance reviews, and engagement was in decline. So they looked for what he called bold ideas and strategies to improve how they engage with their people. And they did something radical. They decided to change their performance review process to a regular check-in culture. Exactly what we're talking about now, which was more conversations more often. And they didn't just change the systems, they really invested in teaching, coaching, and growing their managers so that they could deliver the high quality catch-ups. And better still, they gave their people the autonomy to choose how often they wanted to have these conversations. So they allowed their people to make the decisions around the rhythm of that. So with over 250,000 employees, this wasn't a small project. It was big, and it was a global initiative, and the results were really compelling. So after the first 6 months of dropping the once a year performance appraisals and moving to a check-in culture, engagement rose. And when the managers caught up with their people for once a month, engagement grew by 19%. So let me ask you guys, anyone looking for a 19% improvement in engagement? So having a quality catch up once a month, not a task-focused conversation. So the data is telling us that when check-ins are done more regularly, so that's quantity, and when the managers are trained on how to do them well, so that's the quality, people feel more connected to their manager, their workplace, and their role by 19%. But wait, there's more. When the managers caught up with their employees once a fortnight, so that's twice a month, their engagement grew by 27%. And I know from years of working with the great places to work that this stat is a game changer. So in growing engagement by 27% by catching up with people every second week, I reckon that's pretty remarkable. But the cool thing is that Deloitte didn't stop there. So you might want to hold on to your desk, your computer, because you're about to go, whoa, Nikki, I'm looking for you to do a whoa. So listen to this. If you catch up with your people once a week for a high quality catch up, engagement can grow to a staggering, are you ready? 44%. Whoa. Thank you, Nikki. So the data is proving that the quality of your catch-ups plus the quantity of the catch-ups are actually making a really significant difference. And of course, at first, it's going to take work. It's going to take lots of thoughts and planning, and it's not natural because we're not used to doing it at that way. So now that we're all believers, we're all on board, what makes a quality kick-ass catch-up? So I'm glad you asked. So I'm going to go through what I reckon are some of the top tips for making them work. Firstly, if you cancel, reschedule, I'm putting my mum face on now. So I get that we've all got things that come up, but we need to make sure that your people, our people, know they matter. And we've got to show them that with our actions. And the more quality time we spend with people, the greater the chance we've got of a quality relationship. So that's a no-brainer. So we've all had a person in our lives that's known as the counsellor. And if you don't know who that person is, it might be you. Insert awkward face. And at the end of the day, if you want loyalty and commitment from your people, you've got to show them what it looks like. So counselling's okay, rescheduling, super important. Next, don't let task be king. Task-driven conversations are good, but they're not enough. We need to check in about their KPIs, their goals, their career plans. And I'm not saying we do that every time, but I am saying that we make them a regular part of the conversation, not just every 6 or 12 months. Next, we've got to get our positive on. So the Corporate Leadership Council about 5 years ago, which is now owned by Gartner, did an amazing study. And any of you who have worked with me before will know that I love quoting this because it's so compelling. They surveyed 57,000 employees across 57 countries and did it in public and private organisations. And they were trying to ascertain what makes teams high performers. And one of the most compelling pieces of data was not only did they have great feedback cultures, but the type of feedback that they gave mattered. And they had a ratio of 4:1, which meant that we need to give people 4 times the amount of positive feedback to negative. But it didn't stop there. It wasn't the feedback that said, you're amazing, this is outstanding, I love us, it's awesome. It was actually constructive, positive feedback. So it was feedback based on specific examples. So things like, this report is great because, you know, you've gone straight to the point, you've written a fantastic summary and I can find exactly what I need behind it. Or you ran that meeting really well this week because you kept to the times, you asked everybody what they thought, and then you summarised the actions at the end. So you're getting the gist. So the feedback was specific and it gave them examples of what they were doing well. And people are likely to grow in the areas where we notice them. So it's one of the getting your positive on, which we can do in our catch-ups, is one of the most simple ways to say, I see you, I notice you, and what you do and who you are is important, and it's important to me. I know from working with Invato this year, fantastic tech business, they ran what they call a See It, Say It campaign, which was about helping people feel recognised and noticed, and in the work that they did on the day-to-day. And driving positive feedback was a huge component of the success. In a short amount of time, they saw that engagement grow just from driving this campaign alone. So this stuff really matters. Next, leave your phone. So if you're prone to small heart attacks when you're not within 1 metre of your phone, okay, take it, but turn it off and don't put it on the table. Unless, of course, it's a major issue and you explain that before the start. So what happens for others is there's this subconscious effect when you're holding your phone or have your phone near you, whether you're aware of it or not, says, I have calls or things to look at that are more important than you. And by the way, putting your phone upside down is not being more polite. So it's that dopamine release that we get when we see a notification or we get a message that we're looking for that's holding us back from connecting properly with the people around us. So we know this, and this is our stuff to deal with, but don't let the people that we connect with, that we spend time with, lose out because of your stuff. And if you want to watch a really great 12-minute YouTube clip on this, Simon Sinek, who is a well-known author and really big, is a fantastic speaker on the TED circuit, on lots of circuits. The TED Talk that says how do cell phones impact our relationships is a really cool one to watch. So definitely have a look at that. The next is be present. So I seem to be surrounded with people who I feel really see me, who notice me. And one of them was my second manager ever, a guy called Paul Jury, who I call PJ. And PJ had the patience and the wisdom to sit and to listen and to wait for my answers before he had a response. So these people really stand out. These people really meet us where we're at, and we feel really seen and noticed by them. But the cool thing about PJ was that he was really present. He was in the moment. He looked me in the eye, and he'd notice cues when I avoided the question, or I'd give sort of short responses, or even things he'd notice when I'd scratch my arm when I didn't know the answer. So PJ didn't need to meditate for hours on end. He didn't need to retreat to India or even levitate off the ground to be present for me. He just observed. And sometimes that's all our people want. It's actually just that simple. So seeing, hearing, noticing what's happening in the moment. Is there eye contact? How are you? Are they sitting in their chairs? How are you sitting in your chair? Is there any fidgeting? How's your breathing? How's theirs? So we can all observe these things, but some are better at it than others. And what separates them is practice. And it's not about knowing this stuff, it's about putting it into action. So one of my favorite ways to practice, not to be perfect, is using the Headspace app created by Andy Puttyhome. So his TED Talk, which is the 10 mindful minutes, is a fabulous start if you know really little about how the power of being mindful for you and those around you. So when I'm present, I can see the little spot fires starting and I can deal with them. So I can see people's frustrations. I can see that we're potentially about to miss deadlines, or I can even hear about disagreements that are going on between people. So I can now nip these in the bud and actually start dealing with them. So I know what it takes to be present in my head, but unless I combine it with action, it's just an empty promise to myself and those around me. So I'm going to go back. I see that I've got some notes up here. So Julie, hi Julie, nice to see you. What about laptops in tech? Managers use so sorry, let me backtrack. Julie said, what about laptops? So in the tech market, which I know really well because it's a huge component of my client list, managers use laptops to write notes on. So yeah, they do, but it's still sending a message. So unless you've both got an agreement around how you do those things, for me in those meetings, I would make my laptop really clear and explicit, and I would show the other person that I'm typing notes. But for me, that still even takes me away from being mindful because I can't see their reactions. I can't slow mine down. And most people, it's really hard to think and type at the same time. So I'm not a massive fan, but I will come back to your questions. So keep them coming. And Nikki, you can keep highlighting the ones that need the answers. So let's move on to the next thing. And spending time in preparation. So imagine that you're dealing with a service provider, so you're the client, and they turn up to a meeting with you, and they spend the first minute or so, watching them gather their notes and read them. And then they look up and they ask you what did we agree on last time we met? So they apologize for not being prepared. But do you forgive them? Yeah, maybe. But the thing is, you don't forget, and you certainly don't feel important. So why don't we do this with the people who are meant to mean the most, who are meant to be the most valuable? Spending a small amount of time in preparation is so important for the other person to feel like they matter, and actually for the meeting to have the best impact as well. So what things can you do to spend time in preparation? Think about what's the feedback or a tough conversation that you need to prepare for, or what's a problem that you'd like to focus on solving together. People know whether you've prepped or not. And if you want your time to count, then plan it that way. Even if it's 5 minutes, it goes a really long way. So starting meetings, the catch up that you have with your people, with something like, so last time we spoke about how you were going to manage the client. How'd you go? Or I've been thinking about our last conversation, and this time I think it'd be really great if we can focus on your career and your KPIs, because you mentioned that last time we spoke. So how cool would it be to be on the receiving end of a prepared leader most of the time? Next, ask them for your feedback before you catch up. So most people are not good at thinking of feedback in the moment. But if you want to set the tone with your working relationships where feedback becomes the norm, we've actually got to start that. But telling people that you're open to feedback and, hey, you know, just give me feedback anytime, open door policy, it's great, but it's actually quite unhelpful. It's kind of like saying to someone, hey, can you look out for a new car for me? So it's just too broad and too vague, and it's still very difficult for people to walk into those conversations. So why don't you, before the next catch up, say to them, hey, next time we catch up, can you give me some specific feedback on? It might be your catch ups. Can you give me some specific feedback on how catch ups, what's working, what could be better? It could be specific feedback on how you're running team meetings, what's working, what could be better. And swap it around and ask them for what they want feedback for in return. And now you kind of got this dance and this feedback loop, which makes catch-ups much more meaningful, because you haven't really got elephants in the room anymore, because we're learning to see it and say it in those moments. So who likes being told what to do? I don't reckon there'd be many people saying, me, me, me. So for those of you that have teenagers, you can probably relate. When my 14-year-old daughter, Holly, talks to me about some of the difficult relationships that she's got at school, I know, teenage girls, right? I wish I could take that time back and just apologise for everything that I did then. But the minute I hear, when she's talking about some of the issues that she has with at school, the minute I suggest, and ever so carefully, that maybe she shouldn't invest much more time in some of the girls that are mean to her, she doesn't listen. But if she comes up with a solution, she is much more likely to action it. And whether we've got teenagers or not, I'm sure we can all relate. So we're wired to own solutions when we think of them rather than when other people tell us. So old school leadership says, I tell, you do. But most of us know this doesn't help, and it creates order takers or sheep. People that follow, but they don't think for themselves. And it's not inspiring and it's not collaborative. But I get it, because we're wired to answer questions when people ask us. So this is just something that we have to learn. And most of the time, your advice isn't that great. The more open we become to helping others solve their problems by asking and not telling, often we're going to get better outcomes. So it's our attitude or our mindset towards this concept that counts. It's not about us being perfect about asking. It's about us changing our mindset to doing it in the first place. So next, hold people to account. So start your catch-ups with, hey, last time we agreed to you doing this, this, and this. Start with that in your catch-up. So people, this is what I've learnt about leadership over time and people in general. People feel safe when they've got appropriate boundaries. So respected leaders are those that ask people while they weren't able to meet a deadline or deliver to a standard. And these conversations are not accusations. It's just us asking them And so that's the content of the conversation. But the game changer in those conversations is our intent. So I've got this saying that people hear your content, but they smell your intent. So if we're coming from a good place, it won't come across as confrontational. And then what happens is our people learn that when we set goals together, you're also going to follow them up. And now we're going to watch stuff getting done faster, and they're going to be better because of it. And finally, give yourself permission to be human, or otherwise we're going to end up imploding on ourselves. Hopefully not looking like this. I just wanted an excuse to put this photo in because I really quite love it and I don't get the chance to do it often. It's impossible to be good at everything. And leading people is really complex because we're complex. So don't aim for perfection, aim for progress. Please don't assassinate yourself for your flaws because no one grows that way. So now we've started to have a think about how many opportunities there are for us to become kick-ass. Let's understand what some of the cool stuff that we can learn by going through this online program if we decided that we wanted to download it. So I'm just going to roll you through really quickly a super fast sneak peek. So the first module, Ask More, Tell Less. And it's not news that asking questions, quality question, helps people think and solve problems better. We just need to learn the art of how to do that better. So in this module, we look at the power process of asking questions. Next, we focus on career conversations. People want to have conversations about themselves, how they grow, how they develop their future. And here's the cool news. You don't actually have to have the answers. All you need to do is make the time to ask the right questions. So in here, we give you the questions. Sometimes just showing up with an open mind is actually enough. So here in this module, we'll show you how you can become more mindful in less than 60 seconds with small adjustments leading to big improvements. Module 4 is feedback both ways, whether it's the big conversations or the small ones, whether it's the positive or the negative, it's feedback both ways. It's giving and receiving. So we're going to learn how to get comfortable in both positions. Actually, it's probably the wrong words. Take it as you like. And next, your relationships matter. Whether you want to build relationships with people at work or not, bad luck, you're in them. So the smartest thing you can do is to make them work. And in this module, we help you assess where your current working relationships are, and we help them how to take them to the next level. And finally, designing your catch-up. So this module ties everything that they've learnt through the program and gives you a kick-ass game plan. So it helps you understand what's a template that you can design to make your kick-ass catch-ups rock. So what's next? Lots of options. So let me say just before we jump to questions for those of you that want to stay on the line, you're automatically going to receive a link to our top 10 tips of how to facilitate kick-ass catch-ups. So you can take that and what you've learned here today and use it. And if you just do those things alone, you will significantly change how you connect with your people. Or you could take it to the next level and down the online program, which includes those 6 modules. And of course, I'd love you to connect with me on social media. So at the end of this, I'll show you some different ways that you can do that. But for now, it's question time. So a couple of questions. So let me roll through some of these. Nigel, so the Headspace bloke. So that's Andy Putty Home. Andy Putty Home, just type that into YouTube and TED Talk about mindfulness and his talk will come up. So it's brilliant. It's about 15 minutes and it's really cool. And yeah, we posted that. Thank you, Nikki. Nikki posted that as well. So any tips for managing remote workers? I'm not going to touch on that today because that will change tack for how we do things. But But in actual fact, let me just say, this module is designed for managing remote workers, whether you see people, like you have your catch-ups, or whether you have them, whether they're in another country or not. My team aren't all in Melbourne. So, and most teams aren't all in the same places anymore. So all of this actually still applies to whether it's face-to-face. There are some other things that you can take into account, but I'm not going to necessarily touch on those today. So Tim, you've asked, when I talk about engagement, what's my interpretation of that and how did Deloitte gauge it? That's a great question. So, because I think when we talk about engagement, one of my colleagues is Stacey Barr. I work with her a lot, and she talks about, we use a lot of what we call weasel words that don't really mean, they can mean so many different things to different people. And I think engagement is one of those weasel words. And what Deloitte's were talking about from an engagement perspective is they ask people questions around how connected they are to their manager, how they connected they are to their job, how they connected they are to the organisation and to the organisation's values and behaviours. So they broke it down by those individual things and asked them to score them, asked them to rate them. So that can change over time and it can change daily as well, but that's how they tended to assess how connected they are. And they also, I think they asked some questions as well around whether they would refer Deloitte as an employer to other people. So other people will call that their net promoter score. So that's how they used it. So Holly, I love that you've, nice to see your name out there. Any tips on catching up with people I don't enjoy catching up with? Yeah, I feel your pain, Holly. So luckily I don't have any of those. What I do know is that whether you hire your own team or walk into one, that we are not always going to connect with everybody that we work with. So again, that's kind of that permission to be human piece. But what I do know, and this is kind of one of the things that's carried me forward, this mantra in life, is that how people treat us is a measure of their character. So whether they're people who are difficult to work with or just people who are difficult to be with, they've got particular behaviours and we don't always connect with them. So how people treat us is a measure of their character. But how we respond is a measure of ours. So whether we respect people or not, the challenge for us is to treat people with respect. So Simon Sinek's got this awesome saying that how people, what's he saying? Simon Sinek says that great leaders treat people with respect. For one, you don't know when you're going to need their help. And for two, it's just what great leaders do. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that when we're with people that are particularly difficult, that we've got to keep in mind that that's our triggers. They're the things that trigger us off, because people who that we really love working with, that people we really respect, one of the things that they're really good at is staying calm and measured and treating people well. So there's a deeper dive into that, but I know that when I'm with somebody where I'm having to self-manage, or I'm having to, the way I find challenging, that for me, that's something that I need to work on. So when I flip it to being my stuff rather than their stuff, I've got more control over it. So Megan, any tips when you're on the receiving end of feedback and for encouraging your own managers to engage in kick-ass catch-ups? So there's two questions in that. So I'm going to answer the first one for now. Any tips on when you're on the receiving end of feedback? So in one of the modules in the Kick-Ass program, I talk about feedback being both ways. So one, we've got to learn to prepare well so that it's easier for them to receive. But two, we need to learn to receive feedback really graciously. And I mentioned just before when I was talking about to Holly, that the things that trigger us off in feedback that set us into what we call sort of our stress responses, our fight and flight responses. We need to understand what those triggers are. And so we need to do some reflection pieces around, is it the person that's triggering us off? Is it the content that we're struggling to connect to? Or is something that they're challenging our ego or our sense of self? And there's a few other triggers as well. But one of the things that we really need to think about when we walk away from conversations is do the reflection piece around what we found really difficult to respond to in the moment. And a really good book for that is it's called Thanks for the Feedback, by Sheila Hain, and I've forgotten the other name of the author. And so they talk about if we rewired our system to just respond well to feedback rather than even think about how to structure it, we can actually change how we're wired. So that's a good read if you're interested. Now, I'm really conscious that this webinar only goes for 45 minutes, and I'm happy to stay online for another 15 to answer some of those questions. But I just want to give people permission to hop off and let you know that, yes, we are going to send you the recorded webinar of this again, and yes, send you those top 10 tips. So for those of you that are hopping off, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's great to see over 100 people on the webinar, and the thing that inspires me most is that those 100 people are going out and connecting with people in a better way. So high five or high 10 to you guys that care enough about others to want to do this well.